3 hours after my sister's memorial service, my niece stood beneath the crystal chandelier of our family hotel and announced that I had agreed to sell the building. I had agreed to nothing. Paige lifted a champagne glass while 40 employees, 2 city council members, and a smiling real estate developer watched her. Aunt Nora has finally accepted that Bellamy House needs younger leadership, she said. The sale closes next Friday. Behind her, workers were already carrying framed photographs of my parents out of the lobby. Then Paige's husband, Connor, leaned close enough for only me to hear. "Don't make a scene. Everyone knows the medication has been affecting your memory." I looked at the folder under his arm. A blue tab marked board consent protruded from the top. My signature was probably inside it, so I smiled. That morning, I had found something Paige did not know existed: the original flood risk survey for the harbor block, sealed in a rusted steel tube behind my late sister's office wall. If it said what I believed it said, the developer was not buying a hotel. He was buying evidence. Before I tell you how my own family tried to erase me from the business I helped build, tell me where you're watching from. If you have ever been told you were too old, too emotional, or too confused to protect what was yours, hit like and subscribe. My name is Nora Bellamy. I was 67 that spring, and for 34 years I worked as an insurance fraud investigator along the Gulf Coast. I learned that lies rarely collapse because of dramatic confessions. They collapse because a date is wrong, a signature sits too high, or a document uses a form that did not exist when it was supposedly signed. People remember to invent the big things. They forget the staples. I lived in Mobile, Alabama. The hotel stood near the river, 4 stories of pale stucco iron balconies and green shutters that had survived 7 major hurricanes. My grandparents opened it in 1948 with 12 rooms. By the time my older sister June and I inherited it, Bellamy House had 46 rooms, a ballroom, and a reputation for never closing during a storm. June handled the guests, I handled the risks. Even after retiring, I reviewed every policy renewal: roof inspection, fire report, and vendor contract. June used to say I could smell a false claim through a locked filing cabinet. She died 6 weeks before Paige made her announcement. Ovarian cancer gave us 11 cruel months to prepare and no real preparation at all. During her final weeks, June stayed in her upstairs apartment at the hotel because she wanted to hear the kitchen staff arriving each morning. Paige visited often, usually with Connor, and usually carrying her phone. I came every day. June had protected me since childhood. When our father died, she took over the hotel at 29. When my marriage ended, she gave me a room without asking questions. When her husband was killed in a boating accident, I helped her raise Paige. Paige had been 10. I packed her lunches, sat through piano recitals, and taught her to drive in the hotel's battered delivery van. I never had children of my own, so loving Paige had never felt like helping my sister. It had felt like motherhood. That was what made the memorial so difficult to understand. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The ballroom smelled of lilies and lemon polish. June's favorite jazz trio played near the terrace doors. Paige cried during her speech and rested her hand over mine afterward. Connor barely looked at me. He had married Paige 4 years earlier after meeting her at a development conference. He spoke about unlocking value and underperforming assets, as if buildings were prisoners begging him to free them. June had never trusted him. 2 months before she died, she called me into her office and closed the door. "Watch the south wall," she said. I thought the pain medication had confused her. "What about it?" She glanced toward the built-in bookcase. "If Paige starts talking about selling, don't argue in front of her. Just watch the south wall." That was all she would say. Then, on the morning of the memorial, I noticed one brass screw on the bookcase was newer than the other 3. Behind the panel was the steel tube. I had not opened it yet. I slipped it into the false bottom of my document case, moments before Paige entered without knocking. She asked why I looked tired. Her eyes moved from my face to the bookcase and stayed there, 1 second too long. That was the first moment I knew June's warning had been real. The second came after Paige's announcement. Applause scattered through the ballroom, uncertain and polite. Employees looked at me for confirmation. I kept smiling because Connor was watching for anger. Paige crossed the room and pressed a hand against my back. You should sit down, she murmured. This has been an exhausting day. I'm capable of standing. Her fingers tightened. Please, Aunt Nora, don't embarrass yourself. Connor joined us with the blue-tabbed folder. The board approved the sale unanimously. You signed the consent after your fall in February. I had fallen on wet tile and spent one night in the hospital with a fractured wrist. I had signed one emergency payroll authorization with my left hand because the cast covered my right. Nothing else. Connor opened the folder and showed me the final page. My name appeared above a notary seal. The signature leaned upward just as mine had during the weeks I wore the cast. It was an excellent imitation, but the paper told a different story. I ran my thumb across the lower corner. The sheet had the slick coating used in newer waterproof corporate forms. Bellamy House had never purchased that stock. More importantly, the notary stamp carried a commission expiration date from the previous year. Someone had forged my signature carefully. They had forged the seal carelessly. Before I could speak, the hotel's longtime night manager, Alvarez, appeared at the ballroom doors. His face had gone gray. Nora, he said, ignoring Paige, you need to come downstairs. Connor stepped between us. This is a private family matter. Mr. Alvarez held up a small plastic evidence bag. Inside it was one of Bellamy House's brass master keys. A dark red stain marked the teeth. They found this beside the south boiler room, he said. And there's someone locked inside. Mr. Alvarez led me through the service corridor, while Paige and Connor followed close behind. The hotel changed below the ballroom. Upstairs, Bellamy House was polished brass, white linen, and river views. Downstairs, it was concrete floors, humming pipes, stacked chairs, and the warm yeast smell from the bakery kitchen. I had always preferred that part of the building. Machinery did not care who was grieving or who was trying to steal a company. It responded to pressure, heat, and neglect. At the stairwell landing, Connor caught my elbow. You should stay upstairs, he said. Security can handle it. I looked at his hand until he released me. I am security when it concerns this hotel. Paige stepped in before he could answer. Aunt Nora, today has already been difficult. Let us take care of this. The words sounded gentle. Her eyes did not. Mr. Alvarez unlocked the basement door. The master key in the bag isn't mine, he said. It's from the old set, the set June kept in her office. That stopped me. June's master keys had red enamel dots on the bows. She stopped issuing them years ago after a theft from a locked linen room. Only 3 remained. One with June, one sealed in the office safe, and one assigned to the chief engineer. The key in the evidence bag had a red dot. We turned toward the south boiler room. 2 kitchen employees stood near the wall. A young patrol officer had arrived through the loading entrance. On the floor beside him lay a broken chair and a length of nylon cord. The red stain on the key was not blood, it was lipstick, a bright coral shade. Paige wore pale rose that afternoon. Connor noticed me studying it. So much for a crime scene. The officer did not smile. Someone was still confined against their will. A soft pounding came from behind the steel door. Mr. Alvarez inserted his key. It turned halfway, then stopped. Deadbolts engaged from inside, he said. Then whoever's in there locked themselves in, Connor replied. I crouched beside the frame. The hotel had upgraded its fire doors after Hurricane Ivan. I had reviewed the insurance paperwork myself. A keyed override should have opened that lock, unless someone had jammed the interior thumb turn through the ventilation slot. I pointed to a fresh scratch beneath the handle. Someone locked it from the corridor. Mr. Alvarez returned with a pry bar and the chief engineer, Calvin Brooks. Together they forced the latch plate away from the frame. The door opened 3 inches. A woman fell against it from the other side. Her name was Lena Price. She was 26, worked the morning desk, and had helped care for June when the private nurse went home. One wrist was tied to a steam pipe, her blouse was torn at the shoulder, and a bruise was forming beneath her left eye. I knelt beside her. Lena, can you hear me? She nodded, breathing too fast to speak. The officer cut the cord. Mr. Alvarez wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. When Paige came closer, Lena recoiled so sharply that her heels struck the wall. Paige froze. Why is she looking at me like that? Lena's mouth trembled. You said you only wanted the envelope. The corridor went silent. Connor moved first. She's confused. She's been trapped in a hot room. The boiler room was warm, but not dangerously so. One unit had been shut down for inspection. The wall thermometer read 78 degrees. I had spent 3 decades listening to people explain why obvious evidence did not mean what it appeared to mean. Innocent people usually asked what had happened. Guilty people explained it before anyone accused them. The paramedics arrived through the loading entrance. While they checked Lena, Paige stood beside me, trembling with what might have looked like concern to anyone who had not known her since childhood. "She's always been dramatic," Paige whispered. "Mom indulged her, June trusted her. That does not mean she was stable." There it was again, the same method Connor had used on me. Do not challenge the facts. Challenge the person reporting them. Lena refused transport until she could speak to me alone. The officer allowed us into the laundry office, while he remained outside the open door. She held a paper cup of water in both hands. "Your sister gave me something 3 nights before she died," she said. "A sealed envelope with your name on it. She told me not to leave it in her apartment or put it in the hotel safe." "Where did you put it?" "In locker 14, behind the old uniforms." Locker 14 had belonged to June when she was a teenager working breakfast shifts for our father. "Did Paige know?" Lena looked down. "This morning Connor asked whether June had given me personal papers." I said no. Then Paige came downstairs. "She told me you were confused and that important documents had gone missing." "Did she ask about the locker?" "She asked for my employee key. Every staff key opened the basement locker room. What happened after that?" I followed her. She was standing in front of 14 when Connor came up behind me. He grabbed my arm. "Paige kept saying they only needed the envelope before you saw it." My chest tightened. "Did they find it?" Lena shook her head. "I moved it yesterday." Hope touched me for the first time since entering the basement. "Where is it now?" She reached beneath the collar of her torn blouse and pulled out a small brass token hanging on a chain. It was stamped with the number 317. "June told me that if anyone came looking, I should give you this and say one sentence." I waited. Lena leaned closer. She said, "The hotel was never the target." Before I could ask what that meant, Paige appeared in the doorway with the patrol officer behind her. Her face was pale, but her voice remained controlled. "Aunt Nora," she said, holding up her phone, "the bank just called. Someone transferred $800,000 out of Bellamy House's Storm Reserve account this morning." She turned the screen toward me. The authorization carried my name. The transfer alert showed 8:12 that morning. At 8:14, the bank received a second instruction directing the Storm Reserve account to be closed after the funds cleared. At 8:19, someone using my name requested certified copies of the hotel's insurance schedules and ownership documents. Paige held the phone between us as though presenting a diagnosis. "This is what I was trying to prevent," she said. "You've been signing things and forgetting." The patrol officer looked at me. "Did you authorize the transfer?" "No," Connor exhaled. "Nora, be careful. Making a false report to a bank creates serious problems." He had forged my name twice and was warning me about accuracy. Instead of answering, I pressed 2 fingers against my temple. "I don't remember," I said quietly. Paige's shoulders lowered, not with concern, with relief. The change lasted less than a second, but I saw it. She and Connor had expected resistance. Confusion fit their plan better. While the officer copied the account number, I looked at Lena. Her eyes widened. She understood what I was doing. The token marked 317 rested in my palm beneath a folded handkerchief. It was not a hotel key. Bellamy House had never used numbers that high. 317 belonged somewhere else. The paramedics took Lena to the hospital after the officers collected her statement. Connor called the basement incident a misunderstanding involving an employee who had panicked. The officer did not accept that explanation, but he arrested no one. Lena had not seen who struck her, and Connor claimed he restrained her after she tried to steal confidential papers. It was the uncertainty manipulators used as shelter. One bruise with 2 explanations, one frightened employee against 2 polished executives. When we returned upstairs, the memorial guests were leaving. Employees avoided looking at Paige. The developer, Grant Holloway, stood near the windows speaking into his phone. He was silver-haired, fit, and expensive in a way that required an audience. His company converted old waterfront properties into luxury condominiums. He had tried to buy Bellamy House twice while June was alive. She refused both times. Now he ended his call and took my hand. Nora, I'm terribly sorry. June was one of the last guardians of this city's history. You plan to tear down her hotel. His smile held. We plan to preserve the facade. A coffin keeps its exterior too. I thought Paige stepped beside him. Grant offered to delay today's presentation until you feel stronger. I feel fine. Connor cleared his throat. I let my gaze drift, pretending to lose the conversation. Grant studied me. Of course, on the ballroom table lay the blue-tabbed consent folder. I opened it while all three watched. The document claimed that, after my fall in February, I transferred my voting authority to Paige for 6 months. It also stated that Bellamy House faced immediate insolvency because of storm repairs and insurance premiums. That was false. We had no storm damage, but a forged board consent alone could not move $800,000. The bank required 2 authorized signers for reserve transfers above $100,000. June had been the second signer. She had been dead for 6 weeks. I turned to the electronic authorization page. The approval line did not show June's name. It showed Calvin Brooks, our chief engineer. My stomach tightened. Calvin had worked for us. For 19 years, he had carried June downstairs during Hurricane Sally when part of the roof collapsed. He knew every electrical chase, water valve, and hidden access panel in the building. He also knew about the south wall. Where is Calvin? Connor answered too quickly. He left. 5 minutes ago, he was in the basement. He said he felt ill. I closed the folder. Fraud investigations fail when the investigator falls in love with the first theory. I did not know whether Calvin was involved or being used. Paige touched my wrist. Come upstairs. You need rest. I need to call the bank. We already handled it. The sentence was soft, but it carried ownership. I allowed her to guide me toward the elevator. Connor followed with the folder. Grant remained behind, but I caught his reflection in the brass doors. He was no longer smiling. My apartment occupied the 4th floor. June's rooms were across the hall, sealed since her death. Paige walked me inside. I'm worried about you, she said. Because of the transfer? Because of everything. Connor placed the blue folder on my dining table. We need temporary safeguards until the bank determines what happened. What safeguards? Paige sat beside me, a financial conservatorship. There it was, not a suggestion formed after the alert. She already had the words ready. Connor removed another folder from his briefcase. It carried the letterhead of a private geriatric clinic in Fairhope. Inside was a cognitive assessment I had never taken. The report claimed I confused dates, misplaced documents, accused staff of theft, and showed escalating paranoid fixation concerning hotel ownership. It recommended immediate supervision and suspension of independent financial decisions. At the bottom was the signature of Dr. Samuel Voss. He had treated June during her final month. Paige watched me. Dr. Voss is willing to testify that grief has impaired your judgment. I let the pages slip from my hand. What happens now? I whispered. Connor leaned forward. Tomorrow morning, we ask the probate court for emergency authority. Until then, stay here and let Paige handle the bank. I nodded. They believed I had surrendered. After they left, I locked the door and examined the brass token. The number 317 sat above a faded pelican emblem. I had seen it before. It belonged to Gulf Meridian Station, the old passenger terminal 2 blocks from the hotel. The terminal had not carried trains in 20 years, but its luggage lockers were still rented by a private storage company. I reached for my coat. Then I saw a white envelope pushed beneath the door. Inside was a photograph. It showed Calvin Brooks standing beside Grant Holloway in the hotel boiler room. Between them, mounted on the south wall, was a drilling rig. On the back, someone had written, "They are not buying the hotel. They are buying what is under it." The photograph lay on my dining table beneath the yellow pool of the lamp. Calvin's face was turned toward Grant Holloway, but the drilling rig between them mattered more. It was a compact core sampler, the kind engineers used to extract narrow cylinders of soil and rock. I had seen identical machines during insurance investigations involving sinkholes, foundation failures, and fraudulent subsidence claims. No one brought a core sampler into a hotel boiler room to inspect plumbing. I slid the photograph back into its envelope and checked the hallway through the peephole. Empty. The safest thing I could do was leave immediately for Gulf Meridian Station and open locker 317. The smartest thing was to stay exactly where Paige expected me to be. If she and Connor had already prepared a false cognitive report, they would be watching for any sign that I still controlled my own decisions. A sudden trip downtown would give them a reason to call Dr. Voss, the court, or the police. Worse, whoever had slipped the photograph under my door might be testing me. I removed my coat and returned it to the closet. Then I began to make mistakes. I left one cabinet door open in the kitchen. I put the sugar bowl beside the sink. I moved June's framed photograph from the mantel to the dining table and placed my reading glasses in the refrigerator. The details felt insulting, but that was the point. Paige needed evidence of decline. I intended to give her evidence I controlled. At 7 that evening, she knocked and entered with a tray of soup. Connor followed carrying a small black case. Paige noticed the open cabinet immediately. Her gaze moved to the sugar bowl, then to June's photograph. "Aunt Nora," she said softly, "what happened in here?" I looked around as if the room belonged to someone else. I was looking for my glasses. Connor opened the refrigerator and found them beside a carton of milk. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Paige's eyes filled with tears so quickly that another person might have believed them. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I sat down and let my hands rest loosely in my lap. Connor placed the black case on the table. "Dr. Voss wants to do a short video consultation tonight." "Tonight? It will help the court understand that we're acting responsibly." He set up a tablet and positioned the camera toward me. Paige adjusted my collar like a daughter preparing an elderly relative for church. Dr. Samuel Voss appeared on the screen wearing a white coat despite the late hour. He was in his early 50s, with carefully arranged gray hair and the patient expression of a man accustomed to being trusted. "Nora," he said, "I'm sorry for your loss, thank you. Can you tell me what day it is?" I gave him the date from 2 days earlier. Paige squeezed my shoulder. "What city are you in?" "Mobile, what building?" I hesitated, counted silently to 3, then glanced toward Paige. "Our hotel." Voss made a note. He asked me to remember 3 words: River Candle Garden. I repeated them correctly. 5 minutes later, when he asked again, I said River Window Garden. Another note. The entire performance made my stomach burn. I had interviewed claimants who pretended to be injured for money, but I had never imagined using the same techniques to convince my own family that my mind was fading. Voss leaned closer to the camera. "Have you recently believed people were stealing from you?" I looked at Connor. He wanted me to say yes. "I may have misunderstood some papers," I whispered. Connor relaxed. "Have you felt unsafe around your niece?" "No, Paige takes care of me." Paige lowered her eyes with perfect modesty. Voss ended the call after recommending 24-hour family supervision. Connor packed the tablet away while Paige carried the soup into the kitchen. I watched him slide a small silver device into the black case. It was not part of the tablet. It looked like a wireless signal scanner. Connor had been checking the apartment for recording equipment. That told me 2 things. First, they were not merely trying to control me. They were afraid of being documented. Second, they had probably already searched June's rooms, the hotel office, and any place where she might have hidden evidence. Paige returned with the tray. "We're going to keep your apartment key tonight," she said. "Just until the hearing. I might want to go downstairs. Call me, and I'll come with you." She held out her hand. I placed the key in her palm. Connor smiled as if he had just received the deed. After they left, I waited beside the door. Their footsteps stopped across the hall near June's apartment. A lock clicked, then another. They were searching again. I moved quietly to the service door at the back of my kitchen. Bellamy House had been renovated so many times that most people no longer understood its original layout. Before elevators, staff carried coal and linens through narrow rear passages hidden behind guest rooms. During hurricane season, June and I used those passages to inspect leaks without disturbing evacuees. Paige had never liked confined spaces. Connor did not know the passages existed. I stepped into the dark shaft and pulled the panel shut behind me. Dust brushed my sleeves. The stairs were steep, but my knees held. On the 3rd-floor landing, voices carried through the wall. Paige and Connor were inside June's apartment. She moved it before she died. Paige said, "Lena had the token. She gave it to Nora. Then why hasn't Nora gone anywhere?" A pause. "Because the report is right," Paige replied. She probably doesn't understand what it opens. Connor's voice dropped. Grant says we have until Thursday. If we don't deliver the survey, the whole deal dies. I pressed closer to the wall. What about Calvin? Paige asked. He's getting nervous. He took the money. He took $50,000. That doesn't mean he'll keep quiet when he realizes what's under the foundation. A floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Silence filled June's apartment. I stepped backward into the darkness. The hidden panel opened. A hand reached through and closed around my wrist. The hand tightened around my wrist and pulled me through the opening before I could cry out. I landed against a wool coat and caught the scent of coffee, machine oil, and peppermint. Quiet, Mr. Alvarez whispered. He closed the panel behind us. We were standing inside a narrow maintenance closet on the 3rd floor. Mops, folded ladders, and boxes of light bulbs crowded the walls. A thin line of light showed beneath the door. I pressed a hand against my chest. You nearly stopped my heart. I heard you in the passage. Connor heard you too. How do you know? Mr. Alvarez pointed toward the ceiling. A faint vibration traveled through the plaster. Heavy footsteps moved across June's apartment. Connor was searching for the source of the noise. Mr. Alvarez opened the closet door just enough to look into the corridor. He'll check the service panel next. Then we move. He led me through the employee stairwell and down to the 2nd floor. We entered an empty guest room that faced the river. He locked the door and drew the curtains. I turned on him. Why didn't you tell me you knew about the passages? I didn't know you still used them. That is not what I asked. He looked older than he had that morning. His uniform jacket hung loosely across his shoulders, and sweat darkened his collar. Mr. Alvarez had worked at Bellamy House for 27 years. He had held the lobby doors closed during hurricanes, chased thieves through the kitchen, and slept in a ballroom chair when flooding trapped half the staff overnight. But loyalty was not evidence. I had learned that lesson too many times. Did you put the photograph under my door? I asked. Yes, where did you get it? Calvin gave it to me. That answer raised more questions than it settled. Calvin disappeared after his name appeared on the transfer authorization. He didn't disappear. Connor told him to leave. Why? Because Calvin refused to drill again. I gestured toward the chair near the window. Start at the beginning. Mr. Alvarez remained standing. About 3 months ago, Grant Holloway sent contractors to inspect the hotel. Paige said it was for a new insurance valuation. Calvin let them into the boiler room after midnight so guests wouldn't be disturbed. Why would Calvin cooperate? Connor told him the South Foundation might be unstable. He said a confidential inspection would prevent the city from closing the hotel. That explanation sounded plausible enough to frighten a chief engineer into silence. What did they find? I don't know. The first night, they removed 3 core samples. After that, Grant started coming himself. Did June know? She found mud on the boiler room floor. Calvin admitted what happened. I looked toward the river. Barges moved slowly beyond the glass, their engines sending a low pulse through the building. What did she do? She ordered them out. Then she made Calvin show her exactly where they drilled. And, 2 days later, she asked me to help open the old foundation archive. The archive was a sealed basement alcove containing construction records from before the hotel expanded. I had not entered it in years. Did she find the flood survey? Mr. Alvarez nodded. And something else, what? She wouldn't tell me. She only said the hotel had been built over a lie. That sounded like June. She never used 10 words when 6 could make a person worry for a week. I removed the photograph from my pocket and studied the drilling rig again. Insurance fraud often began with a genuine fact twisted into a profitable story. A crack became a collapse, a leak became a flood, an old injury became permanent disability. If Grant was drilling beneath Bellamy House, he wanted proof of something physical. The question was whether he wanted to reveal it or conceal it. Why did Calvin accept $50,000? I asked. Mr. Alvarez looked away. So that part is true. His wife needs dialysis. Their insurance stopped covering the private center she uses. Desperation explains a crime. It does not erase it. He knows that. Where is he? At his house, unless Connor moved him. I thought of the name beside mine on the transfer authorization. Calvin's credentials could have been stolen, but the conversation I overheard suggested he had taken money. What exactly did he agree to do? Grant paid him to certify that the core samples came from a different part of the property. Which part? The abandoned laundry annex. That mattered. The annex stood on the north edge of the lot. If unstable soil were documented there, it would affect a narrow section of unused land. If the samples actually came from beneath the main hotel, the entire property could be declared unsafe. Or valuable. I walked to the desk and took out hotel stationery. Draw the drilling locations. Mr. Alvarez sketched the boiler room, the south wall, and 3 marks beneath the old foundation. The pattern was evenly spaced. Core samplers used for structural testing usually followed load-bearing lines. These marks did not. They followed the edge of the original property boundary. I remembered the rusted survey tube behind June's bookcase. She had not hidden it because of structural damage. She had hidden it because of ownership. Grant is not testing the building, I said. He is tracing something beneath the land. Mr. Alvarez stared at the map. What could be under a hotel? Old utilities, a buried foundation, a drainage tunnel, or the original river channel. The words stopped me. Before the waterfront was developed, the mobile river had curved farther west. 19th century maps showed marshland and loading yards where Bellamy House now stood. Land created by filling navigable water could carry complicated ownership rights. Mineral deposits, submerged structures, transportation easements, even access rights could belong to someone other than the surface owner. I folded the sketch. I need locker 317. Mr. Alvarez reached inside his jacket and removed a ring of keys. I can get you out through the bakery loading door. Paige has 2 men watching the lobby, hotel employees? No, Grant's security company. The sale had not closed, yet Grant already controlled who entered and left my building. That told me the emergency conservatorship was not the beginning of the takeover. It was cleanup. We left the guest room separately. I used a linen elevator to reach the kitchen and slipped out beneath a canvas laundry cover in the back of a delivery van. It was humiliating, uncomfortable, and effective. 20 minutes later, Mr. Alvarez dropped me across from Gulf Meridian Station. Locker 317 stood at the end of a dim corridor beneath the old departure board. The brass token fit into a narrow slot instead of a keyhole. The door released. Inside was June's sealed envelope, a flash drive, and a handwritten ledger. I opened the ledger first. Every page listed dates, drilling depths, sample numbers, and payments from Holloway Development to a company called Meridian Environmental Recovery. The final entry had been underlined twice. Estimated recoverable material beneath Bellamy parcel, 18,024,000 tons. Beneath it, June had written one sentence. They are not searching for oil, Nora. They are searching for poison. Poison was not a metaphor. I stood beneath the dead departure board at Gulf Meridian Station, with June's ledger open in my hands, reading the same line twice. 18,000 to 24,000 tons of recoverable material beneath the Bellamy parcel. That was not the language of a hotel developer. It was the language of remediation, liability, and excavation. I slipped the flash drive into my coat pocket. The sealed envelope carried my name in June's handwriting. Before I could open it, a man in a gray polo entered the far end of the corridor. He was not looking at the lockers. He was looking at me. I closed locker 317 and walked toward the old ticket hall without hurrying. My shoes echoed across the marble. The man followed. I turned into the women's restroom and pushed through a maintenance door beside the last stall. Old stations were built like hotels, public spaces in front, narrow service routes behind them. A utility stairwell led to an alley beside the parking garage. The man appeared above me just as I reached the exit. Nora Bellamy, stop. No badge, no agency, no explanation. I stepped into the street and raised one hand toward a passing police cruiser. The driver slowed. The man vanished back inside. I took a taxi to Marlowe Risk Consulting, a small office above a maritime supply shop. Its owner, Evelyn Marlowe, had supervised me during a hurricane fraud task force. At 72, she remained sharp-eyed, impatient, and allergic to comforting lies. She opened the door herself. You look like someone followed you. Someone did. I handed her June's ledger. Evelyn read the final pages, then locked the door and lowered the blinds. Where did you get this? My sister June was investigating Holloway. I think she discovered something beneath our property. Evelyn tapped the company name repeated throughout the ledger. Meridian Environmental Recovery was dissolved 9 years ago. Then why was Holloway Development paying it? She turned toward her computer, then stopped. Tell me everything first. I gave her the essential facts: the forged sale consent, false cognitive report, Lena's confinement, missing reserve money, secret drilling, and the emergency conservatorship hearing scheduled for morning. When I finished, Evelyn said, "You need 3 separate strategies, one for the court, one for the stolen money, and one for whatever is under the hotel. Mix them together, and Paige's lawyer will call it grief-driven paranoia. That is already their position, then stop helping them." The words stung because they were true. Evelyn inserted the flash drive into an isolated laptop. 6 folders appeared. Soil title claims Halley Medical P. The final folder required a password. We opened soil laboratory reports, showed arsenic, lead, and chlorinated solvents beneath Bellamy House. Some concentrations exceeded residential's exposure limits by more than 30 times. Could the hotel be unsafe? I asked. Possibly, but these reports do not prove where the samples were collected. The coordinates were altered. Calvin was paid to relabel them. That explains the false locations. It does not explain why Grant wants the property. The title folder contained old deeds, port maps, and a 1919 easement. The Bellamy parcel bordered land once occupied by Gulf Meridian Chemical Works, a wartime manufacturer destroyed by fire. One map showed disposal trenches extending beneath the hotel's south foundation. Evelyn pointed at the screen. There it is, industrial waste. If Holloway buys quietly, he controls the cleanup claim, pursues historical insurers, and redevelops afterward. The hotel was not the prize. The liability beneath it was. June's ledger documented altered samples, consultant meetings, and private payments. Grant appeared to be buying the property before the contamination became public, then profiting from cleanup funds, insurance settlements, tax credits, or all 3. The claims folder held a draft notice to Atlantic Mutual Indemnity, which had insured Gulf Meridian Chemical Works decades earlier. I had handled legacy environmental claims. Old policies could remain valuable when corporate succession and policy language aligned. The projected remediation and redevelopment recovery was $46 million. My hotel had been priced at 6. Evelyn gave a low whistle. Grant is buying a lawsuit with a building attached. I opened June's envelope. Nora, if you are reading this, Paige chose Connor over the family, and I was not able to stop them in time. June wrote that she had confronted Paige 4 weeks before her death. Paige admitted Connor had introduced Grant to the environmental consultant and agreed to force the sale in exchange for a private share of the recovery proceeds. June planned to remove Paige from the board. She never completed the vote. At the bottom, she had written, "Do not assume Calvin is the only employee they paid. Do not trust any medical record signed after March 3. Do not open folder P unless Evelyn Marlowe is beside you." Evelyn read the warning twice. I hate instructions written by dead people, so did June. We tried Paige, Connor, Bellamy, and June's birthday as passwords. Nothing worked. Then I remembered the 3 words Dr. Voss had asked me to memorize during the false evaluation. River Candle Garden. I typed them without spaces. Folder P opened. Inside was 1 audio file and a laboratory order signed by Dr. Voss. The order was for June Bellamy. The test was not related to cancer. It was a toxicology panel. The result showed a sedative in her blood that had never appeared on her medication chart. The concentration was marked as therapeutic, not fatal. That distinction mattered. It did not prove someone had poisoned June, and I refused to turn suspicion into certainty simply because I was angry. But it did prove that a drug had entered her body without being documented by the people responsible for her care. The collection time was 6:40 on the morning of March 4. June had become unusually drowsy that same afternoon. Dr. Voss had blamed the cancer. Before we could play the audio, Evelyn's phone rang. A clerk from Mobile County Probate Court asked for me. "The emergency hearing has been moved," she said. "The judge will consider the conservatorship petition tonight at 7. I checked the clock. We had 52 minutes. 52 minutes was enough time to reach the courthouse. It was not enough time to prove that my niece had forged documents, stolen from the hotel, manipulated a physician, and conspired to conceal industrial contamination beneath our foundation. Evelyn drove while I called 3 attorneys. The first was in trial. The second had represented Grant Holloway's development company 5 years earlier and declined because of a conflict. The third, a probate lawyer named Daniel Mercer, agreed to meet us at the courthouse after Evelyn told him the petition sought control of a 46-room hotel. "Do not mention poison unless the judge asks," Evelyn said as we crossed Government Street. "Not yet, my sister had an undocumented sedative in her blood." "I know, but tonight the court is deciding whether you can manage your affairs. If you present a forged sale, stolen money, contaminated land, a bribed employee, and a drugged sister all at once, Paige's lawyer will call it a delusional system." It felt like surrendering the truth. But she was right. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected. Paige and Connor sat behind a polished table with Dr. Voss and a silver-haired attorney I recognized from Grant Holloway's memorial speech. Grant had sent his own lawyer to take control of my mind. Daniel Mercer arrived carrying no briefcase, only a yellow legal pad. He was 50, broad-faced and calm. "I have read the petition," he whispered. "They are asking for temporary emergency authority over your finances and medical decisions. The judge can grant limited relief tonight, but permanent conservatorship requires more process. What do you need from me?" "Restraint." I almost laughed. Paige testified first. She described finding my glasses in the refrigerator, my confusion during the video examination, the missing reserve funds, and my paranoid accusations against hotel staff. Her voice broke when she said she feared I would destroy June's legacy. Connor placed a hand over hers. Dr. Voss then explained that grief could accelerate cognitive decline. He admitted he had not examined me in person, but said my video responses showed disorientation and impaired recall. Daniel asked whether missing one word in a 3-word test was enough to diagnose incapacity. "No," Voss said. "Did you prepare the report attached to the petition before or after tonight's video call?" Voss hesitated. Before the judge looked up, Daniel continued, "So the report calling Ms. Bellamy incapacitated existed before you conducted the assessment. It was a preliminary clinical opinion based on family observations." Family observations supplied by the petitioner. Yes. That weakened him, but not enough. The bank transfer remained the strongest weapon against me. Paige's attorney argued that I had either authorized it and forgotten or lost control of my own credentials. In either case, he said, the hotel's finances required immediate protection. Then he called Calvin Brooks. Calvin entered through the side door wearing the same work clothes he had worn in the boiler room. His eyes stayed on the floor. For 19 years I had trusted him with every system in Bellamy House. He took the oath and sat down. Paige's attorney asked whether I had behaved unusually since June's death. Calvin swallowed. Yes, the word landed harder than I expected. He said I had entered restricted maintenance areas alone, accused contractors of drilling without permission, and insisted that someone was trying to steal the hotel. He said I ordered him to move money from the reserve account because I no longer trusted the bank. My hands went cold. Calvin was not merely frightened, he was lying for them. Paige's attorney displayed the transfer authorization with Calvin's electronic approval. Did you approve this transaction? Yes. Did Ms. Bellamy instruct you to do so? Calvin looked at me for the first time. Yes. Paige lowered her head as though the answer pained her. Daniel wrote one sentence on his pad and slid it toward me. Do you want me to attack him? I almost nodded. Then I noticed Calvin's left thumb, a dark crescent of blue epoxy sat beneath the nail. Bellamy House used that epoxy only in one place, the waterproof junction boxes inside the old Foundation archive. Calvin had been there recently. If I destroyed his credibility now, I might also destroy the only witness who knew what June found. I wrote back, ask when I gave the order. Daniel stood. Mr. Brooks, when did Ms. Bellamy instruct you to transfer the funds? Yesterday afternoon. Where? In the south boiler room. What time? About 4. I had been at the funeral home at 4, surrounded by staff, Paige, and 24 visitors. Daniel asked whether anyone else heard the instruction. No. Was the boiler room security camera operating? Calvin's eyes moved toward Connor. No, it had been disconnected for repairs. By whom? Me. Paige's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the answer. Daniel approached the witness stand. Mr. Brooks, did you personally enter Ms. Bellamy's authorization credentials? Calvin's jaw tightened. No, who did? I don't know. That contradicted the petition. Calvin had approved the second signature, but someone else had used mine. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Brooks, are you telling this court that the first authorization may have been fraudulent? Calvin stared at his hands. I am saying I never saw Ms. Bellamy enter it. Connor shifted behind Paige. For the first time that evening, their certainty cracked. The judge denied Paige's request for full emergency authority. Instead, she froze the Storm Reserve account, suspended all property transfers for 72 hours, and ordered an independent cognitive evaluation. It was not victory, but I would leave the courthouse with my identity intact. As we stepped into the corridor, Calvin passed close to me. He did not apologize. He slipped a folded maintenance tag into my hand. On the back was an address and 4 words. Askew paid Voss. Below it was a bank reference number. Evelyn and I drove directly to her office. She entered the number into a commercial payment database she still used for fraud consulting. The transaction appeared under an environmental contractor's name. $125,000 had been transferred 3 days before June's toxicology test. The recipient was not Dr. Voss. It was a private company registered to his wife, and the payment description read, Patient Access and Records Management, the payment to Dr. Voss's wife changed the shape of the case. Until that moment, I had believed Paige and Connor were trying to force a sale, because Grant Holloway had promised them a share of the profit. That was greed. $125,000 for patient access and records management suggested something more organized. Someone had paid for access to June, access to her medical records, or both. Evelyn printed the transaction details and spread them beside June's toxicology report. The payment came from Meridian Environmental Recovery, she said. The dead company, then someone is still using its accounts or its name. The routing trail led through a regional bank in Pensacola and ended at an account held by Voss Clinical Consulting, LLC. Dr. Voss's wife was listed as sole manager. The company had no website, employees, or public office. I called Daniel Mercer and gave him the essentials. Do not confront Voss, he said. A questionable payment is not proof of what it purchased. Preserve the record and let me subpoena the account if the court gives us room. What about tomorrow's independent evaluation? Attend it. Cooperate. The court chose the examiner, not Paige. Evelyn leaned over the desk. And do not take food, pills, or drinks from anyone connected to the hotel. I thought of June becoming drowsy on March 4th. I won't. We listened to the audio file from folder P. At first, there was only the hum of an air conditioner and June's uneven breathing. Then Paige spoke. You cannot remove me from the board over one mistake. June's voice sounded thin but clear. It stopped being one mistake when you lied about the drilling. Connor said the testing was confidential. Connor says whatever protects Connor. A chair scraped. Paige lowered her voice. If you report Grant, the city could close the hotel. Do you want 40 employees unemployed because you refuse to be practical? The hotel survived wars and hurricanes. It will survive the truth. You don't know that I know you accepted money. Silence followed. When Paige answered, the anger had vanished from her voice. I needed it. For what? Another pause, then the recording ended. Evelyn checked the file properties. It had been cut at 11 minutes and 32 seconds. The remaining data was missing, not merely silent. June did not stop recording there. I said no, someone edited it, or June split the conversation into more than one file. We searched the drive again, nothing. But the short exchange confirmed one important fact. Paige had accepted money before June died, and whatever she needed it for frightened her more than losing the hotel. We turned to public records. Connor's development company had 3 active projects. 2 were stalled. The third, a luxury marina outside Orange Beach, had been cited for construction without proper wetlands approval. Contractors had filed liens totaling more than $2 million. Paige's name appeared as a personal guarantor on one equipment lease. I stared at the document. She had risked her own assets for Connor's project. Love makes people foolish. Evelyn said that was not love, it was surrender. Further searches showed a lawsuit filed by Connor's former business partner. The complaint accused him of shifting investor funds between projects and using new deposits to cover old obligations. The case had been dismissed after a private settlement. Grant Holloway was named in the filings as the person who supplied Connor with emergency financing. The pattern became clear. Connor was not Grant's partner, he was Grant's debtor. Paige had taken money because Connor's business was collapsing. Grant had offered a way out: deliver Bellamy House before the contamination became public, and he would erase the debt while giving them a percentage of the environmental recovery. If June exposed the scheme, Connor could lose his company and face a fraud investigation. Paige could lose her inheritance, her marriage, and perhaps her freedom. That was motive, not yet proof. At 11, Mr. Alvarez called from a prepaid phone. Grant's security men are removing boxes from June's office, he said. They have a shredding truck in the loading alley. My chair struck the wall as I stood. The court froze property transfers, not document destruction, Evelyn said. Call the police. I did. The dispatcher asked whether I could prove the boxes belonged to me. I explained that corporate records were being removed from a business under disputed control. She promised to send an officer. 20 minutes could destroy 40 years of paper, Mr. Alvarez stayed on the line, describing each box as it passed. Payroll archives, insurance correspondence, old engineering reports. Then he went quiet. Louis? A door slammed, his breathing changed. They saw me. The call ended. I dialed back. The number went straight to voicemail. Evelyn grabbed her keys. We are going. Daniel called before we reached the stairwell. Do not return to the hotel, he said. Paige's attorney just filed an amended petition claiming you threatened employees and concealed hazardous material reports from the city. They are destroying those reports now. I know, I am seeking an emergency preservation order. But there is more. He emailed me the amended filing. Attached was a sworn statement from Grant Holloway. He claimed I had known about contamination beneath Bellamy House for years and deliberately concealed it to keep insurance premiums low. The signature page included 3 old internal memos carrying my initials. I recognized the documents. I had written them during a drainage claim 12 years earlier. Someone had replaced the second pages. They were constructing a version of the story in which I had hidden the poison, endangered guests, and stolen the reserve money to escape responsibility. Paige and Connor did not merely plan to take the hotel. They planned to leave me holding the crime. My phone vibrated with a message from Mr. Alvarez's number. A photograph appeared first. He was seated in the boiler room with his hands bound behind a pipe. Connor stood beside him, holding the brass master key. Then came one sentence. Bring the ledger to the south entrance before midnight, or Luis becomes the first casualty of your investigation. The message gave me 3 hours, midnight, south entrance. Bring the ledger alone. You are not going. Evelyn said, if Luis is still in that boiler room, then walking into the same room gives Connor 2 hostages. Daniel joined us by speakerphone. He had obtained a temporary order requiring Bellamy House to preserve all corporate records, but the order had not yet been served. Send me the photograph, he said. I'll give it to the police and request an immediate welfare check. They already know officers may come, I said. Connor would not send this unless he believed he could move Luis before anyone reached him. Evelyn enlarged the image on her monitor. The boiler room wall behind Mr. Alvarez looked familiar, but something was wrong. The steam gauge above his shoulder should have been beside the main pressure manifold. In the photograph, it hung over painted concrete. Zoom in on the floor, I said. A thin yellow line ran beneath the chair. Bellamy House used yellow floor markings only in the North Service tunnel, where gas pipes crossed under the laundry annex. They moved him, I said. That isn't the boiler room. Evelyn examined the shadows. The photo could be old. The maintenance tag on his jacket is today's color. Blue on Mondays. I called Calvin, he answered after 6 rings. You should not be calling me. Luis Alvarez is tied up in the laundry tunnel. Silence. Calvin, I need the access route. I can't help you. You already did. You gave me the payment reference. That was all I could do. Connor knows you spoke to us. His breathing changed. Where are you? I asked. Do not come to my house. The line went dead. A minute later, a message arrived containing a photograph of an old mechanical drawing. One corridor had been circled in red. It connected the laundry annex to a storm culvert beneath the employee parking lot. Calvin added 6 words. They blocked the hotel side. Use Rivergate. Evelyn printed the map. Daniel's voice sharpened. Neither of you is entering a tunnel. Give the drawing to police. I forwarded it to the detective assigned to Lena's assault. He replied that officers were on the way, but needed confirmation that the tunnel remained structurally safe. The city plans showed it condemned after Hurricane Katrina. It was never condemned, I said. It was excluded from the policy schedule because June sealed it herself. That is not better, Daniel said. It was 11:14. Evelyn opened June's ledger and began photographing every page. We uploaded the images to 3 encrypted locations and sent copies to Daniel. Then I removed the original cover and stitching. What are you doing? Evelyn asked, giving Connor what he requested. I assembled a substitute using blank accounting sheets and 6 copied pages. The first pages showed Grant's payments. Later pages contained altered amounts and a false note that the original samples had been destroyed. Connor might accept it at a glance, but Grant would see tampering. That inconsistency could force them to argue. Evelyn placed a small tracking tag inside the spine. They scanned your apartment for transmitters. This one stays dormant until it moves outside the geofence. Daniel objected again. You are improvising around a kidnapping. I spent 34 years investigating people who staged accidents, burned warehouses, and threatened witnesses. They depend on panic. I am not panicking. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. At 11:28, we drove toward the river in Evelyn's sedan. We turned off our phones 2 blocks from the hotel and used a prepaid handset to contact the detective. He told us officers had reached the south entrance and found it chained from inside. No one answered. We parked near the abandoned ferry ramp. The river gate stood behind a rusted fence at the bottom of a weed-covered slope. Evelyn handed me a flashlight and the fake ledger. You stay behind me, she said. You are 72. And armed, she showed me a canister of bear spray. The gate opened with one of Mr. Alvarez's old maintenance keys. Beyond it, the culvert descended beneath the street. The air smelled of mud, rust, and stagnant water. We moved slowly. My insurance work had taught me to notice changes in surfaces. Fresh footprints crossed the silt. 2 sets went inward, 1 returned. Halfway down, my flashlight caught a strip of blue fabric snagged on a bolt. Lewis's maintenance tag. We followed the tunnel toward the laundry annex. At the first junction, the passage narrowed around a collapsed brick wall. Someone had stacked plywood over the opening recently. Evelyn tested it. Loose. We removed 1 panel and crawled through. A muffled voice came from ahead. Nora? Luis. I reached a storage chamber and found him tied to a chair. Blood had dried along his temple, but he was conscious. Evelyn cut the cord while I checked the doorway. Where is Connor? I whispered. He left 10 minutes ago. He said you would come through the south entrance. Who stayed with you? Luis looked past me. The metal gate behind us slammed shut. A lock snapped into place. The overhead work lights came on one by one, exposing rows of steel drums hidden along the tunnel wall. Their labels had been stripped away. A speaker crackled above us. Connor's voice filled the chamber. You always were better at finding fraud than avoiding it, Aunt Nora. I grabbed the gate. It did not move. You have the wrong ledger. I called. I know. My stomach dropped. A small red light blinked on the ceiling beside a ventilation fan. Connor continued. Grant checked the photographs you sent to the cloud. Your friend's office network was compromised before you ever opened June's drive. Evelyn stared at me. Our preserved evidence, our messages to Daniel, and the location of the real ledger were no longer secret. Then a chemical odor drifted from the nearest drum. Sharp, sweet, industrial. The ventilation fan stopped. Connor spoke one final time. You have 14 minutes before the first city inspector arrives upstairs. When he finds 3 bodies beneath a contaminated hotel, Paige will finally have every reason she needs to declare you responsible. The red light began counting down. The countdown showed 13 minutes and 42 seconds. I pressed my sleeve over my nose and forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic increased ventilation. In a contaminated space, that meant drawing more poison into the lungs. Do either of you feel dizzy? I asked. Louis shook his head. Evelyn moved toward the nearest drum but stopped before touching it. The odor is strongest here. The drum's lid was closed. A clear tube ran from its vent into the wall. The smell was not leaking, accidentally. It was being released through the tunnel's old ventilation system. I aimed my flashlight at the ceiling. Bellamy House's basement ducts had been modified repeatedly, but the original emergency controls were mechanical. Electrical sabotage could stop a fan. It could not eliminate every manual damper. Lewis, where is the fire isolation lever? Other side of the gate. Is there another? In the utility chase, but they covered it when the annex closed. What wall? He pointed behind the drums. Evelyn and I pulled the first container forward. It was heavy, but it rolled a few inches on its metal rim. Behind it, a plywood panel had been screwed into the bricks. The chemical odor thickened. 12 minutes, Luis grabbed a rusted wrench from the floor and attacked the screws. His injured hand slipped twice before Evelyn took over. I examined the red countdown light. It was not connected to the ventilation system. A thin wire disappeared through a drilled hole in the ceiling. Connor wanted us to believe the timer controlled the release, but the odor had already begun. The timer controlled something else. Stop, I said. Evelyn looked at me. The inspector is arriving when that reaches 0. Connor needs us unconscious before then, but he also needs the scene to look convincing. Lewis followed my gaze to the steel drums. An accident. A criminal cover-up disguised as exposure. The countdown was theater. The real danger was already in the air. Evelyn tore the plywood loose. Behind it was a narrow cavity containing 2 iron handles. One was painted red, the other had once been yellow. Lewis pointed to the red lever. Fire damper. And the yellow, storm exhaust. I pulled the storm exhaust handle. Nothing moved. Rust held it in place. All 3 of us leaned against the lever. Metal groaned inside the wall, then released with a violent snap. Somewhere above us, a heavy damper opened. Air rushed through the chamber. The chemical smell began to thin. At the same moment, an alarm sounded in the laundry annex. Connor had wired the old airflow sensor into the hotel system. Opening the exhaust had announced that we were still conscious. Now he knows, Evelyn said. A door slammed beyond the far end of the tunnel. Footsteps approached. Luis searched the chamber and found a short iron bar. Evelyn raised the bear spray. I held the false ledger against my chest. The footsteps stopped outside the locked gate. A flashlight beam swept through the bars. Police, a voice called. Show me your hands. I did not lower mine. Name and badge number. The officer answered correctly. A second uniform appeared behind him with the detective from Lena's assault case. They cut the lock and led us into the open air through the laundry annex. Paramedics examined us beside the loading dock. My eyes burned, and Evelyn had developed a cough, but none of us showed signs of serious exposure. Connor was gone. So were the men from Grant's security company. The city inspector arrived 6 minutes later. He had received an anonymous complaint accusing me of storing hazardous waste beneath the hotel. Instead, he found sealed drums, a rigged ventilation line, and 3 intended victims. That did not prove Connor had built the trap, but it destroyed the scene he wanted. Daniel Mercer met us at the emergency room shortly after 1 in the morning. He looked furious enough to prosecute us himself. You ignored every instruction I gave you. We brought Luis back alive, I said. You also entered a contaminated tunnel, carried falsified evidence, and communicated on a network you knew might be compromised. I did not know it was compromised. That is precisely the problem. Evelyn coughed into a tissue. Lecture her tomorrow. No, tonight she understands this. Intelligence is not immunity. Connor anticipated the ledger copy, the cloud backup, and the rescue route. He is not improvising. I had underestimated him. I had treated Paige as the emotional center, and Connor as the ambitious husband attached to her. But Connor had built the surveillance, the false reports, and the tunnel trap. Grant might have financed the operation, yet Connor was directing it from inside the family. Daniel placed a business card on my hospital tray. Dr. Miriam Cole, Environmental Forensics and Industrial Exposure Reconstruction. She testified in a refinery contamination case I handled last year, he said. If anyone can determine what those drums contained, where the soil samples originated, and whether the hotel poses a real danger, it is her. Call her. I already did. She refused. Why? Because the photographs and reports you have are copies with broken chains of custody. She will not risk her license on material that may have been altered. June's ledger was still hidden in Evelyn's office, but Connor knew that. Retrieving it might lead him directly to us. What would convince her? I asked. An original core sample with documented collection location, or access to the untouched drilling site beneath the south wall. The hotel was now sealed by the city pending inspection. Paige's attorneys had already requested that I be barred from entering. Daniel continued, Dr. Cole will meet us at 8 tomorrow morning. She will listen, nothing more. If we cannot give her verifiable physical evidence, she walks away. What about the drums? Police took custody. Testing could take days. We did not have days. The court's 72-hour freeze had already begun. At 7:45, Evelyn, Daniel, and I entered Dr. Cole's laboratory near the port. She was a compact woman in her early 60s with cropped black hair and no patience for introductions. She read June's reports, examined the photographs, and listened without interrupting. When I finished, she pushed everything back across the table. These coordinates are corrupted, the laboratory seals are missing, and your ledger is not here. I cannot tell a court where those contaminants came from. There must be another way. There is. She opened an aerial map of Bellamy House and marked the south foundation. Core drilling leaves more than holes. It leaves cuttings, lubricant residue, and sample fragments in the extraction sleeve. Bring me the original drill head Grant's contractors used, and I can compare its residue with the material beneath your hotel. That equipment disappeared months ago. Dr. Cole enlarged the photograph of Calvin and Grant. On the rig's metal frame was a rental company barcode. She wrote down the serial number. This machine is still immobile, she said. It was rented again yesterday. By whom? She turned the screen toward us. The current delivery address was Calvin Brooks's house. Calvin's house stood on a narrow street west of downtown, a one-story brick home with a wheelchair ramp leading to the porch. The drill rig was supposed to be in his garage. It was gone. The garage door stood open, revealing an empty floor, a crescent of hydraulic fluid, and fresh tire tracks leading toward the alley. A delivery tag had been torn from the frame and left beneath a workbench. Dr. Cole crouched beside the stain. Moved recently, she said. Less than an hour. Daniel checked his phone. The rental company says pickup was not authorized. Evelyn looked toward the silent house. Where is Calvin? I knocked. No answer. The front door was unlocked. Daniel stopped me. We call the police. 2 officers arrived and entered ahead of us. I remained on the porch until they cleared each room. Going inside without permission could have contaminated evidence and given Paige another example of my supposed recklessness. The living room looked undisturbed. A dialysis schedule hung on the refrigerator. A woman's cardigan lay folded across a chair. On the kitchen table sat 2 coffee cups, one still warm. Calvin's wife, Denise, was not there. Neither was Calvin. An officer found several drops of blood on the laundry room floor. Behind the house, narrow ruts crossed the wet grass and ended at the alley. Whoever removed the drill had loaded it onto a trailer. Evelyn found a crushed paper beneath the fence. It was a transfer form from Harbor Light Dialysis Center. Denise had been scheduled for treatment at 6 that morning. The clinic confirmed she never arrived. Calvin had not merely taken Connor's money and changed his mind. Someone had taken his wife. I thought about his testimony and the maintenance tag he slipped into my hand. I had believed he was trying to protect himself while easing his conscience. I had misunderstood him. Calvin was not balancing greed against loyalty. He was bargaining for Denise's safety. Daniel questioned the rental company. The rig's tracker had been disabled minutes after delivery. The dispatcher remembered speaking with a man who knew the serial number, contract, and security code. Connor had accessed Evelyn's network. He could have seen our search for the barcode. Every useful step we took was becoming a map for him. Dr. Cole examined the torn tag. The drill head may still contain valid residue, she said. But if they clean it or replace the cutting assembly, the comparison becomes useless. How long? An hour to do it properly. We were already too late. Daniel's phone rang. His expression changed as he listened. The court-appointed examiner canceled your evaluation. Why? She received your hospital record, photographs of you entering the tunnel, and a statement that you fabricated a ledger to entrap Paige. I looked at the false ledger in Evelyn's evidence bag. Connor had photographed it. The tool I designed to confuse him now supported his claim that I manufactured evidence. Daniel continued, Paige's attorney is asking the judge to reconsider emergency conservatorship at 2. It was 9:23. My plan had failed at every critical point. The cloud backup was compromised. The drill disappeared. Calvin and Denise were missing. The examiner withdrew. My false ledger had become evidence against me. I had spent my career telling clients that a failed theory was information. Connor knew our legal moves before they happened. Someone might be feeding him more than hacked files. Daniel had shared the examiner's identity only with the court clerk, Evelyn, me, and his office. I looked at him. He understood. You think the leak is mine. I think we keep assuming Connor is breaking into systems when someone may be helping him. My paralegal prepared the notice. Who? Rachel Mendez. She has worked for me 6 years. Any connection to Holloway? None that I know. Evelyn gathered the papers. Then we stopped sharing plans electronically. Daniel's jaw tightened. If Rachel is involved, accusing her warns Connor. If she is innocent, we destroy someone who may be our best access to the court filings. Another choice with no clean side. Dr. Cole closed her case. Without the drill head or a documented sample, I cannot help you in court today. Could the residue in the tunnel prove an intentional release? Possibly, if law enforcement preserves it correctly. That will not stop the sale. No. The detective emerged from Calvin's bedroom carrying a clear evidence sleeve. Inside was a disposable phone. It was taped beneath the dresser, he said. One saved voicemail. He played it. Connor's voice filled the kitchen. Testify exactly as instructed, and Denise receives treatment. Miss one detail, and Harbor Light learns her insurance authorization was obtained with fraudulent income records. The message ended. Connor had discovered fraud in Denise's medical assistance application and weaponized it. Calvin's payment, testimony, and silence had been purchased with the threat of taking away the treatment keeping his wife alive. The voicemail helped us. It also implicated Calvin and Denise in benefit fraud. Daniel looked at me. We can file this before the hearing. It undermines his testimony and proves coercion, and exposes Denise. If we conceal it, Paige may gain control of you in the hotel. I stared at the dialysis schedule. June had trusted me to protect Bellamy House. Louis had risked his life. Lena had been assaulted. Every hour we delayed gave Connor more power, but using the voicemail meant turning a sick woman into collateral damage. Evelyn spoke quietly. There may be another way. Before she could explain, the disposable phone rang. The screen displayed no number. The detective activated the recorder and answered without speaking. A woman whispered through the speaker, Nora. It was Paige. Her voice was shaking. Do not give the voicemail to the court. Connor has Calvin and Denise at the old marina project. He says if you file it, he will leave them inside the flood chamber when the tide gate opens. Then she began to cry. I can get them out, she whispered, but only if you promise to destroy June's toxicology report. Paige's request hung in the kitchen like a second threat. Destroy June's toxicology report, and she would help us reach Calvin and Denise. Refuse, and Connor would leave them in a flood chamber. Daniel covered the phone's microphone. We cannot promise to destroy evidence. The detective shook his head. Keep her talking. I looked at the dialysis schedule on Calvin's refrigerator. Denise's next treatment was less than 24 hours away. Even if Connor released her, missing that appointment could put her in the hospital. I uncovered the microphone. Paige, listen carefully. I will not destroy the report. Her breathing broke. But I will not give it to the court today. Daniel turned toward me, but I raised a hand. You help us get Calvin and Denise out alive. After that, you tell the truth under oath. If you do those things, I will make sure the report is handled through proper medical and legal channels, not released to the press. Connor had used shame and exposure to control everyone around him. I would not use the same method, Paige whispered. You don't understand what he'll do. I understand exactly what he has already done. No, you don't. Then show me. For several seconds, only static came through the line. The flood chamber is beneath the west pier at Harbor Crest Marina, she said. Connor controls the tide gate from the construction office. He has a remote override on his phone. Is he there now? He left 20 minutes ago. He thinks I'm at the courthouse filing the amended petition. Where are Calvin and Denise? In the chamber below the pump room. Their hands are tied to the ladder. The detective began writing directions. Paige continued. The gate opens automatically at 11:40 if the system believes there is pressure buildup. Connor disabled the alarm but not the timer. It was 9:48, we had less than 2 hours. Why should we trust you? Daniel asked. Because I'm the one who changed the release code, Paige said. Connor doesn't know, she gave us 6 digits. The detective dispatched a Marine unit and tactical officers to Harbor Crest. He ordered Paige to remain on the line and meet police at a location away from Connor. She refused. If Connor checks my car tracker and sees me leave downtown, he'll know. Then turn off the tracker, the detective said. He'll know that too. Paige had spent months helping Connor build a cage. Now she understood every bar. Evelyn leaned close to the phone. Can you trigger the gate from where you are? No, the override only works on the Marina network. Can you delay it? I can change the pressure threshold if I reach the construction office. That puts you beside Connor, I said. He won't be there. He's meeting Grant. I heard the uncertainty in her voice. She was lying about something, not everything. Just enough to preserve one final piece of loyalty. Paige, where is Connor really? Silence, then she said, he's on his way to Dr. Voss. Daniel and I exchanged a look. Why, he thinks Voss kept a copy of June's full medical file. The toxicology report was not the only record Connor feared. Paige agreed to enter the Marina office and disable the tide sequence. The police would approach by water to avoid the vehicle cameras. We would remain at Calvin's house before ending the call. She said my name once, not Aunt Nora. Just Nora. If I do this, there is no going back. There was no going back when you took Grant's money. The line went dead. At 10:31, the Marine unit reached the West Pier. Body camera footage showed officers cutting through a chain beneath the pump room. At 10:37, they found Calvin and Denise bound to the ladder, with water already covering the chamber floor. At 10:42, the tide gate activated. The release code failed. Connor had changed it again. Paige was still inside the construction office when the alarm sounded. She called the detective, screaming that the controls were locked. Calvin and Denise had 6 minutes before the incoming surge reached chest height. The officers could not cut the ladder bolts underwater. The manual gate wheel had been welded in place. I stared at the marina plans displayed on the detective's tablet. Harbor projects often included redundant drainage to satisfy insurers. Connor might ignore regulations, but lenders required emergency systems. Show me the original flood control sheet, I said. The detective enlarged the drawing. A secondary relief pipe ran beneath the fuel dock and discharged through a gravel basin. It had been marked abandoned after a redesign. Abandoned is not the same as removed. The Marine unit found the pipe behind a steel access plate. It was packed with construction foam. They broke it open with a hydraulic spreader. Water tore through the relief line just as the tide gate opened. The chamber flooded to Calvin's waist, then stopped rising. At 10:56, both he and Denise were lifted onto the pier. Paige walked out of the construction office, with her hands visible, and surrendered her phone. She had chosen, not cleanly, not early enough, but she had chosen. Daniel filed an emergency notice preserving the voicemail, while requesting that Denise's medical assistance records remain sealed pending review. The judge postponed the conservatorship hearing until the following morning and ordered Paige to have no access to hotel accounts. For the first time, Connor stood alone. Near noon, the detective received a call from Dr. Voss's clinic. The office had been broken into. Voss was missing. His wife had been found unconscious in the records room, alive but sedated. Several cabinets were emptied, yet one locked drawer remained untouched because the intruder had snapped the key inside it. Police opened the drawer under warrant. It contained a paper chart for June, the continuation of the audio recording, and 7 toxicology reports from other patients. All 7 had received the same undocumented sedative. 3 had died within 48 hours. The oldest case was 6 years old. At the bottom of every payment authorization was the same name, Grant Holloway. 7 patients, 3 deaths, one name repeated at the bottom of every payment authorization. Grant Holloway. The discovery pulled the floor out from beneath everything I thought I understood. Bellamy House was no longer the center of the scheme. It was one location in a pattern that stretched back 6 years. Daniel read the names from the toxicology reports, while the detective checked each against public records. The patients had little in common at first glance. Two were widows, one was a retired shipping executive, another owned a warehouse near the port. The youngest was 58 and had spent his final weeks in a private rehabilitation facility after a stroke. All had been treated or consulted on by Dr. Voss. All had property connected to waterfront redevelopment. Within a year of each death, Grant Holloway or one of his companies acquired an interest in the property. Evelyn stood beside the conference table in the police annex, arms folded tightly. He didn't simply buy distressed assets, she said. He created the distress. The detective cautioned us not to jump beyond the evidence. The toxicology reports proved undocumented sedation. The payments tied Grant to Dr. Voss's consulting company. The property transactions created a pattern, but none of that alone proved Grant ordered anyone harmed. I understood the distinction. I also understood why June had been afraid. The continuation of her audio recording began where the first file ended. Paige's voice was quieter. I needed the money because Connor had already used my shares as collateral. June answered, "You did not have authority to pledge them. He forged the approval, and you protected him. If the lenders called the debt, they would take everything. They could not take the hotel without my vote. That is why Grant needed you gone." The room seemed to contract around me. On the recording, June coughed, then continued, "Paige, listen to me. Connor is not trying to save your marriage. He is helping Grant acquire properties from owners who are sick, isolated, or frightened. Dr. Voss gives them the medical story. Connor gives them the financial pressure. Grant arrives with the solution." Paige began to cry. "I didn't know about the other families. You knew enough to stop. I thought it was only paperwork. Paperwork is how people steal without touching the victim." Then came the sound of a door opening. A man entered the room. His voice was unmistakable. Grant Holloway said, "June, you should have accepted the first offer." The recording ended there, not gradually, not after an argument. It stopped in the middle of the room. The detective replayed the final seconds. There was a faint metallic click after Grant spoke, followed by 3 seconds of low interference. "Could be someone handling the recorder," he said. "Or removing it," Evelyn replied. The paper medical chart provided the next fragment. June's nurse had documented that she was alert at 2:10 that afternoon. At 2:35, Dr. Voss entered alone. At 3, June became difficult to wake. The medication administration record showed no sedative. At 3:18, Paige signed a note stating that June had requested no visitors because she was exhausted. I remembered arriving shortly after 4. Paige had stopped me outside the apartment and said June was sleeping comfortably. I had trusted her. That memory hurt more than the forged signatures. Paige had not merely chosen Connor over the hotel. She had stood between me and my sister while June was being silenced. The detective brought Paige into an interview room. I watched through the glass with Daniel and Evelyn, while she listened to the continuation recording. When Grant's voice filled the speaker, Paige folded forward as if struck. "I did not know he was coming," she said. The detective asked who stopped the recording. Grant saw the device on the side table. He put it in his pocket. "Then how did it end up in Dr. Voss's file?" "I don't know. What happened after he arrived?" Paige wiped her face with both hands. June told him she had copied the environmental reports and sent them to someone outside the hotel. Grant said copies were useless without an original sample. Then Dr. Voss came in. "What did Voss administer?" "I never saw. Did June consent?" "No." The word came out almost soundless. Paige said Voss told her the medication would calm June and prevent a cardiac event. Grant insisted that delaying the sale would expose everyone to lawsuits and criminal charges. Connor told Paige that if June became agitated, the court could question her capacity to alter the board structure. "And you allowed it?" the detective asked. Paige looked through the glass. She knew I was there. "Yes, I felt something inside me close. Not rage, a door. Until that moment, some part of me had still separated Paige from Connor and Grant. I had imagined her trapped by debt, love, and fear. Those things were true. They were not enough. Paige had made choices. The detective asked whether the sedative caused June's death. "I don't know," Paige said. "She woke up the next morning. She was weaker, but she spoke to me. That mattered. June had survived the undocumented dose. Her death 4 weeks later from advanced cancer could still have been natural. We could not call it murder, simply because Grant's pattern was horrifying. But her next words changed our direction. June said she had hidden the original core sample. Paige whispered. Not the report, the actual sample. Dr. Cole had told us an original sample could establish where the contamination came from and validate the altered laboratory records. Where? The detective asked. June would not tell me. She said Nora would understand the phrase, the claim that never sank. I knew exactly what she meant. 22 years earlier, I investigated a fraudulent marine claim involving a supposedly sunken restaurant barge. The owner had hidden the vessel in a dry dock and filed for a total loss. June had teased me for months after I found it behind a wall of shipping containers. The dry dock still existed. It belonged to Bellamy House through an old subsidiary no one used. That was where June had hidden the sample. The detective ordered officers to secure the property. Dr. Cole gathered her equipment. Daniel prepared an emergency request to block every Holloway transaction linked to the 7 patients. Our goal was no longer merely to stop the sale of Bellamy House. We had to identify every family Grant had targeted and preserve whatever evidence remained before his network destroyed it. At 4:20, the first officers reached the abandoned dry dock. The storage bay had been forced open. Inside, they found June's metal sample case. It was empty, but beneath the foam lining was a handwritten inventory card listing 2 identical cores. One had been stored at the dry dock. The second had been delivered to an unnamed witness. At the bottom, June had written, "If Grant finds this case, Nora must find the woman who survived." The woman who survived was named Celia Ward. She was 63, a former port accountant who had owned warehouses east of the river. 6 years earlier, Grant Holloway tried to buy her property after a fire damaged one building. Celia refused. 2 months later, she suffered what Dr. Voss called a stress-related collapse. Public records showed that Grant acquired an option on her land while she was hospitalized. Unlike the other patients, Celia did not die. She disappeared. Evelyn found her through an old workers' compensation filing. Celia had moved under her maiden name to a small town outside Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Daniel warned that we could not arrive with police and demand evidence. Celia was not under subpoena, and one careless move could be characterized as intimidation. So Dr. Cole, Evelyn, and I drove north without uniforms or cameras. Celia lived behind a pecan orchard. She watched us through a screen door while 3 dogs barked around her porch. When I mentioned June, she let us inside. The core sample stood in a locked gun cabinet beside her dining room. It was a gray cylinder nearly 3 feet long, sealed inside a clear sleeve. Its evidence label carried June's initials, the date, drilling depth, and the word Southampton Bellamy House, Doctor. Cole did not touch it. Who delivered this? June, Celia said. Luis Alvarez came with her. That gave us 2 witnesses to the transfer. Why you? I asked. Because she knew what Grant did to me. 6 years earlier, Voss treated Celia after she became dizzy during a meeting with Holloway representatives. She remembered drinking coffee, waking in a private clinic, and being told she had suffered a psychiatric episode. Voss restricted her visitors. Connor, then working as Grant's consultant, brought documents claiming her warehouses were in foreclosure. They said signing the option was the only way to save my employees, Celia said. I signed, then my sister found me. Her sister was a pharmacist. She questioned the medication list, removed Celia from the clinic, and ordered an independent toxicology test. The same sedative found in June's blood appeared in Celia's. Why didn't you report it? I did. She opened a file box containing a police complaint, letters to the medical board, and a response stating that the evidence did not establish unlawful administration. Voss claimed the drug had been given during emergency treatment. Grant denied involvement. Part of Celia's chart vanished. 1 complaint had not been enough. 8 matching toxicology reports, suspicious payments, altered property transfers, and a surviving witness were different. Dr. Cole photographed the sealed sleeve and documented every signature before accepting custody. She would compare its soil profile with residue recovered from the tunnel, the drums, and the drilling records. But she made the limits clear. The sample can prove contamination beneath Bellamy House and expose the false coordinates, she said. It cannot prove Grant ordered anyone drugged. Celia's testimony could establish a pattern. The medical charts could show undocumented sedation. Bank records could link Grant's company to Voss. Still, no single piece proved the whole conspiracy. That was the weakness Daniel expected Grant to exploit. By late afternoon, we gathered in a secure interview room at the district attorney's office. Daniel drew 4 columns on a whiteboard. Property, medical, money, coercion, under property. We listed the altered coordinates, hidden core, Calvin's relabeling, undervalued sale, and prior Holloway acquisitions. Under medical, we listed the toxicology reports, missing medication entries, Voss's consulting company, and Celia's independent test. Under money, we listed payments from Meridian Environmental Recovery, Connor's debts, Paige's collateral agreement, and Grant's expected environmental recovery. Under coercion, we listed Lena's assault, Luis's confinement, Denise's threat, the tunnel trap, and the forged documents used against me. The structure was persuasive, it was not complete. We need an act that joins the columns, Daniel said. Something current, something Grant cannot dismiss as old paperwork, unrelated medical care, or rogue behavior by Connor. The detective suggested arresting Connor and pressing him to cooperate. He'll blame Paige or Voss, I said. Grant built the system so everyone below him looks responsible. Celia spoke from the end of the table. Then make Grant think the system is about to fail. She explained that Grant had contacted her twice after June's death. He believed she still possessed records from her old complaint. Each time, he offered money for a confidentiality agreement. He does not know I have the core, she said. Now he would. Celia would contact Grant through the attorney he had used before. She would claim June left her 2 original core samples, the complete payment ledger, and a list of surviving patients. She would offer to exchange them for enough money to leave the state. Grant would expect a trap, so we would make the offer believable. Paige agreed to message him that I had lost control of the investigation and that Celia feared public exposure. Calvin would confirm that 2 cores existed. Dr. Cole would package a harmless fragment of unrelated fill soil to resemble a cutting from the Bellamy sample. No one would ask Grant to confess. We would ask him to identify what he wanted destroyed, name the people he needed silenced, and explain how he intended to preserve the contaminated property claim without the original evidence. Daniel outlined the legal boundaries. Celia could record because she would participate in the conversation. Law enforcement would supervise the contact, preserve the device, and avoid directing her to manufacture statements. We could not threaten Grant, promise immunity, or misrepresent government authority. Most importantly, Celia could not hand him the real sample. If he takes possession, chain of custody becomes a battlefield, Doctor. Cole said the meeting would occur at an abandoned customs warehouse Celia once owned. Grant believed it remained tied to one of her shell companies. In reality, the Port Authority had reclaimed it and granted investigators controlled access. By evening, the real core was sealed in Dr. Cole's laboratory, under camera coverage. The ledger was with the district attorney. The toxicology records were copied through formal evidence channels. For the first time, destroying one room, one computer, or one witness would not erase the case. At 9:17, Celia sent Grant a photograph of the sample label. His reply came less than a minute later, not a denial, a command. Bring both cores, no copies, no Nora. Then a second message appeared. Voss is already handled, do not make me handle you. Grant's message gave us exactly what Daniel wanted. He had acknowledged Voss, threatened Celia, and demanded the destruction of physical evidence. But a text message could still be challenged as anger, bluff, or impersonation. We needed Grant to act. The district attorney approved the controlled meeting for the following night. Until then, I had to appear defeated. At 10 the next morning, I returned to probate court with Daniel. Paige sat on the opposite side of the room, separated from Connor's attorney and accompanied by a public defender. She looked as though she had not slept. Connor did not appear. His attorney claimed he was receiving emergency medical treatment after suffering a panic episode. No hospital confirmed admitting him. Grant's lawyer presented the city's preliminary contamination notice and argued that I had concealed environmental danger beneath Bellamy House. The hotel could not accept guests until inspectors completed testing. Our insurer reserved its rights, 2 tour groups canceled, local news vans lined the courthouse steps. Every headline carried my name. Hotel ogre accused of hiding toxic site. Bellamy House closed after underground chemical discovery. The allegations were false, but the contamination was real. That distinction did not help the 40 employees waiting to learn whether they still had jobs. Daniel objected when I told the judge I would accept temporary financial supervision. "You do not need to concede that," he whispered. "I do if Grant is watching." The court appointed a neutral receiver to manage Bellamy House for 30 days. Paige received no authority, neither did I. The ruling protected the hotel from being sold, but it also removed me from the business my family had owned for generations. When the judge asked whether I understood, I stood. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice did not shake. The receiver would control payroll, insurance correspondence, building access, and public statements. I could not enter the hotel without written permission. I could not move corporate funds. I could not instruct employees. Paige watched me sign the order. Her expression carried shame, but I did not look away. She had helped create the conditions that made the order necessary. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me. I read the statement Daniel prepared. Bellamy House will cooperate fully with environmental testing. Until the facts are established, I am stepping away from operational decisions. My priority is the safety of our guests, employees, and community. A reporter shouted, "Did you know there was poison beneath the hotel?" Another asked whether grief had affected my judgment. I answered neither question. From across the street, a black sedan idled beneath an oak tree. Grant sat in the rear seat. He wanted to see me fall. I let him that afternoon. The receiver announced that Bellamy House would close indefinitely. Employees would receive 2 weeks of emergency pay. After that, their future depended on insurance coverage and remediation costs. Mr. Alvarez called me from the hospital. "People are scared," he said. "Some of them blame you. They have the right." "No, they don't. They have the right to be angry at the person whose name is on the building." The silence between us hurt more than the headlines. My grandparents had kept Bellamy House open through hurricanes, recessions, and war. I was the first Bellamy to close its doors. Even temporarily, it felt like a funeral. At 6 that evening, Celia arrived at the Port Authority warehouse wearing a gray raincoat and carrying a hard plastic sample case. Inside were 2 false cores prepared by Dr. Cole. The outer sleeves carried photographed copies of June's labels. Only a laboratory examination would expose the substitution. A small audio transmitter was sewn into Celia's collar. A second recorder sat inside the case handle. Police occupied an office 2 buildings away. Daniel, Evelyn, Dr. Cole, and I watched through fixed security cameras. Paige joined us under guard. Her role was simple. She would send Grant one final message from her own phone. Nora surrendered control. The receiver locked her out. "Celia is frightened and ready to trade." Paige typed the words but did not send them. "What happens after Grant arrives?" she asked. "Celia asks what he intends to do with the samples," Daniel said. "She keeps him talking. Police intervene only when there is a clear crime or immediate danger." "And Connor?" "We assume he is with Grant." Paige looked at me. "Connor knows how you think." "No," I said. "He knows how I used to think." She pressed send. Grant replied with a location change. Pier 9, 20 minutes. The customs warehouse was at Pier 7. Daniel frowned. "He is testing whether Celia is being watched." The police could move, but repositioning surveillance risked exposure. Pier 9 was an active cargo zone with blind corners, container stacks, and private security traffic. Celia read the message and said, "I'll go." "No," I answered through her earpiece. "That was not the agreement." Grant sent another message, "Come alone or the deal is dead." Celia looked directly into the warehouse camera. "People like him survive because everyone waits for a safer room." Daniel argued against it. The detective requested additional units. The district attorney authorized the change only if Celia remained in public view and did not enter a vehicle or enclosed structure. We moved at Pier 9. Rain began falling over the river. Celia stood beneath a loading canopy with the sample case at her feet. Police watched from an unmarked utility truck. We monitored from a port office 300 yards away. Grant's sedan appeared at 8:43. He stepped out alone, no Connor. Grant approached Celia without an umbrella. His suit darkened in the rain. but his expression remained calm. "You brought both?" he asked. Celia touched the case. "First, I want the money." Grant smiled. "You want survival. Money is only how you measure it." He crouched and examined the copied labels through the clear lid. For 1 second, his eyes stopped on the lower seal. Dr. Cole inhaled sharply beside me. "What?" I asked. "The evidence tape." One corner had lifted in the humidity. Grant touched it with his thumb. Celia moved the case away. No inspection until payment. The moment passed, or appeared to. Grant stood and handed her a phone, displaying a wire confirmation for $2 million. "Once I have the cores, the remaining records disappear," Celia said. "They already have. What about Nora?" Grant looked toward the river. "Nora signed away control this morning. By sunrise, the receiver will receive a federal evacuation order. The hotel will be condemned, and Holloway Development will purchase the debt from the insurer." He believed he had reached the final phase. Then headlights ignited behind the container stacks. A white utility van rolled toward Celia. Grant opened its rear door. Inside sat Connor. Dr. Voss and 3 steel chemical drums. Connor raised a pistol and pointed it at Celia. "Put the samples in the van," he said, "or tonight's cleanup begins with you." Connor's pistol changed the operation from surveillance to rescue. The detective gave the order. 2 tactical officers moved from behind the utility truck, while another team closed the eastern exit. Celia did not move. She stood beneath the loading canopy with rain running from her hood, one hand resting on the sample case. "You brought Voss," she said. Connor pushed the pistol farther through the van door. "Put the case inside." Dr. Voss sat on the floor behind him with his wrists bound. His shirt was stained, and one side of his face had swollen nearly shut. He was not Grant's partner anymore. He was evidence Grant intended to erase. Celia bent toward the case. Grant watched her hands. Connor watched her face. Neither watched the rear wheel of the van. The first officer reached it without a sound. Then Voss shouted, "The drums are wired." Connor turned. The officer struck his gun arm against the doorframe. The shot tore through the canopy roof. Celia dropped behind a concrete barrier as police flooded the pier. Grant stepped away from the van, raised both hands, and said, "I am an attorney's client attending a private settlement." Even surrounded by armed officers, he was already manufacturing an explanation. Connor fought. He kicked the first officer and reached beneath the driver's seat. A second officer fired a stun device. Connor collapsed beside the van, his fingers inches from a black remote. The red button had already been pressed. Warning lights on all 3 drums began flashing. Dr. Cole seized my arm. "Those are location beacons." The drums held contaminated soil and solvent residue taken from the Bellamy tunnel. Each carried a forged chain of custody tag bearing my initials. Connor had intended to leave them with Celia's body and the false cores, tying me to evidence theft, illegal dumping, and murder. But the remote had triggered something else. Daniel's phone rang. The neutral receiver at Bellamy House had received an automated emergency package containing fabricated engineering reports, and a scheduled message claiming the hotel foundation was collapsing. The package also activated the building management system. Fire doors closed, elevators stopped, sprinkler valves opened on the 4th floor, flooding June's apartment and mine. Connor had built a second cleanup plan. While police arrested him, the hotel was destroying the paper trail. I called Mr. Alvarez at the hospital. "Louis, where are the manual sprinkler controls?" "Main valve room under the west staircase." The electronic locks sealed the basement. "There's an exterior utility hatch beside the bakery exhaust." "Who has the key?" "Calvin." Calvin and Denise were under police protection across town. An officer could bring him, but water was already pouring through ceilings that had survived 3 generations. Then Paige stepped forward. "I have a copy." She removed a small brass key from inside her shoe. Connor had taken her phone, her accounts, and nearly her freedom, but she had kept one piece of access hidden. 10 minutes later, Paige and 2 officers were racing toward Bellamy House. At the pier, police freed Voss and restrained Grant while detectives examined the van. Grant remained composed. "You have a frightened physician, an unstable developer, and a disgruntled property owner," he said. "None of that connects me to a crime." Celia touched the recorder sewn into her collar. "You threatened me. I warned you against extortion. You demanded the cores. I believed they were stolen corporate materials. Grant had prepared a harmless translation for every sentence. Then a technician opened the first drum. Beneath the contaminated soil was a waterproof document pouch. It contained signed payment instructions from Grant to Meridian Environmental Recovery, copies of the 7 patient files, and a handwritten list of properties acquired after each patient was sedated. Grant's expression changed for the first time. Connor had kept insurance. He had hidden a survival file inside the evidence they planned to plant against me. The pouch also contained a flash drive. Its directory showed payment photographs, messages between Grant and Voss, and a video recorded inside June's apartment. The device had to be authenticated before anyone played it. But Connor began shouting from the pavement. He ordered all of it, the drugs, the appraisals, the guardianships. I have account numbers. Grant looked down at him. You have nothing admissible. Connor laughed through split lips. I have your voice telling Voss how much to give June. Grant had arrived to destroy evidence and discovered that his own partner had preserved it. My phone rang. Paige was inside Bellamy House. We stopped the valve, she said, but the water reached June's office. The south wall collapsed. Is anyone hurt? No, but there is a room behind it. June had hidden more than a steel tube. What is inside? Files, property records, medical releases, photographs, and a wall map with red pins from Mobile to Pensacola. Aunt Nora, Bellamy House was where June tracked every property Grant targeted. News helicopters were already circling Pier 9. The arrest, drums, and weapon had become public before Daniel could control the story. Then Grant's attorney arrived with a federal injunction. He claimed the records in the van and hidden room were protected by attorney-client privilege because Grant had used Holloway Development's legal department to manage the acquisitions. Until a judge ruled, investigators could be barred from examining the most important evidence we had found. Grant planned for seizure, Daniel said. He turned his conspiracy files into legal files. The district attorney requested an emergency hearing for the next morning. The court would decide whether the records were privileged communications or evidence used to further ongoing crimes. If Grant won, the files could be sealed for months. If we won, the entire network would open. At dawn, Bellamy House remained surrounded by inspectors, reporters, employees, and families connected to the 7 patients. The receiver scheduled a public board meeting in the ballroom after the hearing to determine whether the hotel would be condemned, transferred, or restored. Grant demanded permission to attend remotely from custody. Paige would testify against Connor. Calvin would explain the altered samples. Celia would face the man who stole her property, and I would reveal what June built behind the south wall. As I entered the courthouse, Daniel handed me Grant's final filing. Attached was one last document, a notarized deed claiming June had sold Bellamy House to Grant 3 days before her death. This time the signature looked perfect. The notarized deed was dated 3 days before June died. It transferred Bellamy House, the adjoining dry dock, and every environmental claim tied to the property to Holloway Development for $6 million. The document said June had acted voluntarily, understood the transaction, and waived independent counsel. Her signature curved across the final page with the confident downward stroke she had used for 40 years. Paige stared at it in the courthouse corridor. She never signed that. Grant's lawyer approached with 2 assistants and a rolling case of exhibits. Grief does not invalidate a lawful contract. I ignored him and examined the notary block. The seal belonged to Madeline Crew, a traveling notary who had handled hotel affidavits before. Her commission was active. 2 witnesses had signed beneath her. This forgery was built to survive inspection. Daniel pulled me into a conference room where Dr. Cole, Evelyn, the district attorney, and the receiver waited. On the table lay photographs from the room behind June's collapsed wall. The hidden archive contained medical releases, development options, insurance applications, guardianship petitions, and property maps tied to all 7 patients. June had arranged them by date. Red string connected Voss's clinic, Connor's consulting work, Grant's companies, and payments through Meridian Environmental Recovery. It was a private investigation assembled by a dying hotel owner. The original records remained sealed until the judge ruled on privilege. But their dates proved June had been investigating Grant before the deed was supposedly signed. Why would she sell while building a case against him? Evelyn asked. Grant's lawyer claimed June discovered the contamination, panicked over liability, and negotiated a confidential sale. Her archive, he said, was due diligence. Daniel pointed at the deed. We attack execution, capacity, witnesses, payment, delivery. The receiver checked county records. The deed had never been recorded. No purchase money appeared in Bellamy House accounts. Grant produced a private escrow statement showing $6 million held by Meridian Fiduciary Services, another company that looked legitimate until someone examined it. The receiver's public board meeting was scheduled for noon. Employees, insurers, creditors, and city officials were already gathering in the ballroom. If the deed survived the hearing, Grant could claim ownership before the meeting began. Paige sat apart from us. I know one witness, she said. Elise Gardner had been June's evening nurse. Connor fired her after June died, accusing her of stealing medication. The second witness, Thomas Vale, had worked at Voss's clinic and could not be located. Elise came to the apartment that day, Paige said. June asked for Nora twice. I looked at her. You told me she was sleeping. Paige lowered her eyes. Did you see the notary? No Grant? Yes, he was there with Connor. Did June sign anything? I saw papers on the table. She could barely lift her water glass. That supported incapacity, but did not disprove a signature. Evelyn studied the scanned deed under a magnifier. The signature may be genuine. The room went silent. June's capital J had a tiny hesitation before the lower loop. She developed it after breaking her finger as a teenager. My instincts told me Evelyn was right. June may have signed the page. The question was what she believed she was signing. Sophisticated fraud rarely forged a signature when it could substitute the document. A genuine signature attached to a false final page was stronger than an imitation. Show me the staple holes, I said. Daniel enlarged a photograph of the original. 4 punctures were visible in the upper left corner. 2 did not align with the current staple. The signature page had once belonged to another document. Daniel requested immediate examination. The judge allowed a document expert to inspect it under camera supervision. At 10:30, police found Elise at a motel near the airport. She had a one-way ticket to Costa Rica. I called her. Elise, this is Nora Bellamy. I have nothing to say. June asked for me that day. Silence. You were there when she signed. I did what the doctor told me. What did he tell you? The line went dead. 10 minutes later, she sent one message. I will testify if they move my son first. Her son was serving time in an Alabama prison. Grant had promised to move him away from a violent unit in exchange for her signature. Now she believed he would be harmed if she spoke. The district attorney could request an emergency safety transfer, but could not promise it as payment for testimony. Elise refused to enter the courthouse until her son was physically moved. Grant had placed one frightened person between us and the truth. At 11:40, the judge ruled that the seized records were not automatically privileged. Communications used to further alleged fraud, coercion, evidence destruction, or unlawful medical conduct could be reviewed under court supervision. It was a major victory. The deed question was deferred to the public board session so the receiver, insurers, and city could address ownership and safety together. Grant was allowed to appear by secure video from custody. We crossed the street toward Bellamy House. For the first time since the memorial, I entered through the front doors standing upright, wearing the navy suit June chose for my retirement dinner. Employees filled the lobby, reporters crowded behind barriers, families of the 7 patients held photographs and handwritten signs. The ballroom had become a hearing chamber. At the front sat the receiver, city attorney, insurance representatives, and board members. Grant's face appeared on a large screen above the stage. Connor sat under guard beside his lawyer. Paige waited at the witness table. Calvin and Celia occupied the first row. June's hidden map stood covered on an easel. Daniel placed the disputed deed before me. The examiner confirmed that the signature page came from another instrument. But he could not identify the original document. Elise still had not arrived. Without her, Grant could call the substitution a clerical reconstruction rather than fraud. The receiver struck the gavel. Today, this board will determine who controls Bellamy House, whether the property can safely reopen, and whether the proposed transfer to Holloway Development has legal force. The ballroom doors closed, my phone vibrated beneath the table, a live video appeared. Elise stood in a prison parking lot. Crying behind her, two officers escorted her son toward an unmarked transport van. A man stepped into the frame and placed a gun against his neck. Connor smiled from across the aisle. The receiver called the first witness. The first witness was supposed to be Dr. Cole. Instead, I stood. Daniel caught my sleeve. Nora, the police need time. On my phone. The gunman kept one hand on Elise's son and the other around the pistol. Connor watched me from across the ballroom, waiting for panic to undo everything we had built. I placed the phone face down. Then we give them time. The receiver reminded me that I had not been called, but Daniel requested permission to address the disputed deed before any ownership decision. Grant's lawyer objected. The city attorney argued that ownership affected every other issue before the board. The receiver allowed 10 minutes. I carried the deed to the document camera. This signature belongs to my sister. I said, I believe that because fraud is strongest when it borrows something real. Grant's image filled the screen above me. You have no proof the document was altered, he said. Not yet, his lawyer smiled. I displayed a payroll authorization June signed during her final week. The signature page had the same paper fibers, same printer marks, and same two misplaced staple holes as the deed. Daniel placed both documents side by side. The original payroll authorization ended with a fourth page approving emergency wages for employees during June's illness. That fourth page was missing from the hotel archive. The signature page attached to Grant's deed was not created for a property sale. It had been removed from the payroll document. Grant's lawyer called the comparison speculative. Then Paige stood. Connor's smile disappeared. She walked to the witness table without looking at him. Her hands shook as she took the oath, but her voice held. Connor asked me to bring him every document June signed while she was weak, she said. He said Grant's attorneys needed examples to prepare the sale. Did you know he intended to substitute a signature page? Daniel asked. Not at first. When did you learn? The evening after June died. A murmur moved through the employees. Paige admitted that Connor showed her the assembled deed and said it would protect them if I challenged the sale. He told her June had intended to sign eventually, and that replacing one page merely completed her decision. Did you believe him? I chose to. Connor rose so violently that his chair struck the floor. She is lying to save herself. The guards forced him back into his seat. Paige looked at him for the first time. I lied for you when you forged Nora's name. I lied when you paid Calvin. I lied while June was asking for her sister. Her voice cracked. I am not lying for you again. Connor's attorney tried to stop the questioning, but the receiver allowed Daniel to continue. Paige identified Elise and Thomas Vale as the witnesses Connor selected. Neither had seen June sign a deed. They were paid or threatened into validating the substituted page. My phone vibrated. A message from the detective contained only 2 words. Keep going. The gunman had not yet been contained. Dr. Cole testified next. She presented the sealed core Celia had preserved and explained the documented chain of custody from June and Mr. Alvarez to Celia, then to her laboratory. The soil profile matched residue recovered from the original drill site beneath Bellamy House. The altered reports had falsely placed the contamination beneath the abandoned laundry annex. The contaminants are real, Dr. Cole said, but current air and surface tests do not show an immediate exposure threat in occupied hotel areas. The property requires controlled remediation, not demolition. Grant's claim that the building required emergency condemnation collapsed. Then she displayed the economic analysis. The contaminated land carried historical insurance rights, tax credits, and potential recovery claims worth many times the $6 million purchase price. Grant had not offered to rescue Bellamy House. He had attempted to buy its hidden legal value before anyone else understood it. Calvin followed, he admitted, accepting $50,000 to mislabel the core samples. He also described Connor's threats against Denise's dialysis treatment and identified the voicemail police had recovered. I committed fraud, Calvin said. No threat changes that. He turned toward me. I am sorry. I did not forgive him from the witness table. Forgiveness was not evidence, and it was not owed on demand. But I nodded once. Celia told the board how Voss sedated her, isolated her from family, and used a fabricated psychiatric crisis to pressure her into transferring property rights. The district attorney confirmed that 7 similar patient files were under criminal review. Finally, investigators unveiled June's map. Red lines stretched across the Gulf Coast, connecting vulnerable property owners, Voss's medical interventions, Connor's financial pressure, and Grant's acquisitions. Grant leaned toward the camera. "This is the private obsession of a dying woman. It proves nothing." Daniel inserted the authenticated flash drive recovered from the drum in Connor's van. The ballroom screen went dark. Then June's apartment appeared. The video had been recorded by a small camera hidden inside her mantel clock. June lay propped against pillows. Grant stood near the window. Voss prepared a syringe beside the bed. Connor's voice came from behind the camera. "Once she is sedated, we switch the payroll page and have the witnesses sign the deed." Grant answered, "Make sure Nora is kept out until it is done." No interpretation was necessary. No one in the ballroom moved. The recording continued. June turned her head toward the mantel, as if she knew exactly where the camera was. "You can steal paper," she whispered. "You cannot steal what the paper proves." Voss injected the medication into her intravenous line. Paige began to sob at the witness table. On the screen, Connor asked Grant what would happen if June recovered enough to speak. Grant replied calmly, "Then Voss adjusts the story and we question her capacity." The receiver stopped the recording. Grant's lawyer demanded a recess, arguing that the video was stolen, privileged, incomplete, and improperly presented. The district attorney stood. The recording was recovered during the lawful search of a vehicle containing abducted physician Samuel Voss, hazardous evidence, forged records, and an armed suspect. Mr. Holloway's claim of privilege cannot shield communications made to facilitate fraud and coercion. My phone rang. The detective's voice filled my ear. "We have Elise's son. Gunman is in custody. Elise is safe." The breath left my body so quietly that no one noticed. I turned toward Connor. His last piece of leverage was gone. The ballroom doors opened. Elise entered between 2 officers. She testified that June had signed only the payroll authorization. Connor later brought her a deed and threatened her son unless she signed as a witness. Thomas Vale had received money through Voss Clinical Consulting for the second signature. The receiver ruled that Grant's deed had no legal force. Paige and Connor were removed from the Bellamy House board. The proposed sale was void. The neutral receivership would remain only through remediation and an independent governance review. Police officers approached Grant's video screen as a detention officer entered his room in the county facility with a new warrant. Connor was arrested on additional charges involving kidnapping, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Paige was taken into custody as well, but the district attorney acknowledged her cooperation and role in saving Calvin and Denise. As the guards led Connor toward the ballroom doors, he twisted toward me. "You think this saves the hotel?" "No," I said. "The truth only gives us the right to try." He searched my face for the confused, grieving woman he had built his plan around. She was gone outside. The reporters surged toward the steps inside. Employees slowly stood as June's map remained illuminated behind the empty witness table. Bellamy House was damaged, closed, and burdened by poison beneath its foundation. But it still belonged to us, and for the first time since June died, so did my own name. 4 months later, Bellamy House reopened with 38 rooms instead of 46. The south wing remained closed behind temporary walls, while environmental crews removed contaminated soil through a sealed excavation system. Dr. Cole supervised every stage. Air monitors stood in the lobby, the kitchens, and each occupied floor. Their green lights became part of the hotel's new morning ritual. Guests noticed them. I wanted them to. For too long, Bellamy House had survived by keeping its troubles behind polished doors. We would not rebuild on another layer of silence. The remediation cost more than any storm repair in our history. But the old insurance policies June uncovered covered much of the work. The state approved a brownfield recovery grant. The city provided temporary tax relief because the project protected the riverfront from further contamination. Grant had expected to collect those benefits after buying the property for a fraction of its value. Instead, the money restored the hotel he tried to steal. The criminal cases moved more slowly. Connor remained in county custody awaiting trial on charges involving kidnapping, fraud, witness intimidation, unlawful confinement, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. His attorney blamed Grant for everything and described Connor as a desperate businessman trapped by a powerful developer. The recordings, payment records, and tunnel evidence told a different story. Grant was transferred to federal custody after investigators connected his companies to property schemes in 3 states. More surviving families came forward after Celia's testimony became public. Some cases were too old to prosecute, others lacked complete records, but the pattern could no longer hide behind isolated paperwork. Dr. Voss surrendered his medical license before the state board could revoke it. He began cooperating with prosecutors after learning that Grant had ordered Connor to kill him at Pier 9. His cooperation would probably reduce his sentence. It would not restore the years he stole from his patients. Paige accepted a plea agreement. She admitted participating in the forged board consent, the false deed, the transfer of hotel funds, and the attempt to discredit me through a manufactured cognitive evaluation. In exchange for truthful testimony against Connor and Grant, prosecutors recommended a reduced sentence. The judge had not decided what that sentence would be. I had not spoken to Paige since the board hearing. She wrote every week. The first letters were full of apology. The next ones tried to explain how Connor isolated her, controlled their accounts, threatened to expose her debts, and convinced her that every crime was temporary. By the 9th letter, she stopped explaining. She wrote only, "I kept choosing him because admitting the truth would have required me to become someone else. I understand now that every choice made me exactly who I was afraid to be." I placed that letter in June's old desk. I did not answer, not because I hated Paige. Hate would have been easier. I still remembered the 10-year-old girl asleep against my shoulder after piano lessons. I remembered teaching her to drive and standing beside June at her wedding. Those memories had not disappeared simply because the woman she became betrayed us. But love did not require access. That was the lesson I learned too late. Calvin pleaded guilty to falsifying environmental records and assisting the unauthorized transfer. His cooperation, Connor's threats, and Denise's medical situation were considered at sentencing. He received probation, community service, and a permanent ban from signing regulated engineering documents. He did not return as chief engineer. He returned twice a week as a paid consultant to help the remediation team understand the hotel's old systems. Every decision required independent review. Trust, once broken, needed structure. Mr. Alvarez became operations director. On reopening morning, he stood beneath the chandelier in a new navy jacket while employees gathered in the lobby. Lena Price returned as guest services manager. She still avoided the south basement corridor, but she no longer apologized for it. Celia joined the independent board, so did Dr. Cole, Daniel Mercer, one employee representative, and a retired judge with no connection to the Bellamy family. I gave up permanent control voluntarily. That surprised people. They expected me to fight for the chair June once held. But Bellamy House nearly died because too much authority lived inside one family, and too few people could challenge it. The new charter required outside audits, dual approval for reserve transfers, protected reporting channels, and annual reviews of every related party contract. No one would ever again be asked to trust a Bellamy simply because our name was above the entrance. The hidden room behind June's office became a small archive and education center, documenting the history of the waterfront contamination. We included the names of the families Grant targeted, with their permission. June's map hung behind glass. Beside it was her final message: "Paperwork is how people steal without touching the victim." I added another line beneath it: "Good records are also how the victim touches back." The hotel did not reopen with a grand gala. I did not want speeches, champagne, or cameras. At 6 that morning, the kitchen baked biscuits. Housekeepers rolled carts into the renovated halls. The first guests were 12 former patients and relatives connected to the investigation. Their rooms were free. Celia arrived carrying pecan pies. Dr. Cole complained that our air monitor placement was 2 feet too close to a return vent. Louise pretended not to hear her, then moved it the moment she turned away. For the first time in months, laughter moved through the lobby without sounding disrespectful to grief. Near sunset, I climbed to the fourth-floor balcony outside June's apartment. The river reflected a long band of orange light. A cargo ship moved toward the bay, slow and steady, its horn rolling across the city. June's rooms had been repaired, but I kept one section of the south wall exposed beneath glass. The old bricks showed every era of the hotel: original mortar, hurricane patches, new steel supports. A building did not survive by pretending it had never been damaged. Neither did a person. I placed my hand against the glass. "We're open again," I said. The wind lifted a strand of my hair. Somewhere below, the front bell rang as another guest entered. I did not feel June beside me as a ghost. I felt her in the systems she built, the people she trusted, and the truth she refused to bury. Bellamy House was no longer the inheritance Paige expected to receive, or the asset Grant wanted to exploit. It had become a responsibility shared by people willing to protect it. Blood can create a family, but it cannot excuse betrayal. Grief can make us vulnerable, but it does not make us foolish. And age does not erase the instincts, skills, and judgment earned across a lifetime. Sometimes protecting a legacy means holding on. Sometimes it means letting go of the people who believed your love made you easy to control. I stayed on the balcony until the sky turned dark and the hotel windows began glowing one by one. Then I went downstairs. There was work to do. If Nora's story kept you listening, leave a comment and tell me which warning sign you believe she should have recognized first. Like the video, subscribe to this storytelling channel, and remember, no one has the right to write your final chapter while you are still here to hold the pen.